Okay, so yeah, thank you for attending today. As Kaylee said, this is being recorded, so you can share it with your colleagues and coworkers. It is Stuart, McIntosh, and myself today. We founded Outpost Security about 6 years ago, and we were focused on threat detection and alerting in Splunk. And then about 6, 7 months ago in December, Cyderes acquired us, and we are now part of the Cyderes team. Stuart, you want to give a little bit of your background and how we got here?
Sure. I think I'm actually pushing almost 25 years now doing IT security. So we're getting there. We're getting the gray hairs. But yeah, all technical, strategic, a lot of tactical in the trenches. How do we actually start making progress solving security problems and actually getting the outcomes we want? So lots of hands-on work over those years.
In almost 20 years at a Fortune 500 insurance company, correct?
Yep. So lots of like messy business operating procedures and regulatory features. So that's always fun. Yep.
Yeah, that, and you've essentially had all of the roles in a security program very early on, not only building out the program, but doing the work as a engineer, an analyst, a manager, director, all those things.
Yep.
All right. And so, as I mentioned, we were at Outpost Security, we were focused on threat detection and alerting. And one of the big reasons that we joined Cyderes is because they are a full services um, end-to-end security provider. This is just kind of an overview of all the different parts of security programs we work in with our customers and clients. I think the most important thing here, especially for us, is coming from a smaller uh, security partner, is that truly has a global presence. We have about 1,000 employees worldwide, and we really provide end-to-end security services and also security outcomes from the very front point of identity and access management all the way to full service 24 by 7 managed SOC. And the other part I like to point out, and again, one of the big reasons that we chose to join Cyderes was because we take a truly co-managed approach. For us, this means that it is your platform, your technologies, your roadmap, and we come and support you as a true security operations partner. And when it comes to Splunk, especially as a platform, everything that we're going to show you today and double click on is inside of your Splunk environment. You have full access, full visibility, and essentially full influence on how the detection and alerting workflows and platform operate. And again, it's according to your priorities and your approach as a security program.
And the other thing I just want to hit on there, Will, is that usually we don't ask about these things until a renewal comes. And so what's great about this is that value is front and center, that access, the value of your platform investments, the value of your partnership investments, all of that we're continuously trying to get the most out of, not just when a renewal's coming up. Because that's the other thing I've kind of seen is no one asks these questions until there's a renewal. And then there's like, oh, okay, we'll make it better. No, this is every week, every day, we're delivering the value right there for you to see.
So today, in the spirit of optimizing Splunk and security, we wanted to sort of reset maybe how we're talking and thinking about security, specifically around the SIEM and the role of the SIEM. And this, I think, sets the stage for taking Splunk and security to a completely different level that you might not have expected or even known as possible. But in order to even kind of take that first step, we wanted to do a little re-baselining about how we think about detections and alerts specifically. And I don't want to say traditionally, but in its essence, a SIEM produces security alerts that someone has to look at, either automated review and response, automated enrichment, or a human has to look at it and make a decision about, all right, is this a true threat or is this something that we don't need to worry about? So what we would like to propose and present today is kind of an advancement of that um, from a thought model almost. So the way we approach detection and response and security inside of Splunk is we look at detections as sensors, and those sensors produce advanced telemetry. With that advanced telemetry, we can produce or output two things. One is high value alerts, and the second is a quantifiable and identifiable risk posture. Now that I just threw a lot of terms and concepts out there, but for now, let's just start with detections are sensors and they produce advanced telemetry. The rest of this we'll kind of unpack and double click as we go through the rest of the hour, but let's start there as a baseline. And that's what's going to unlock these extended security capabilities inside of Splunk that we're also going to highlight as we go forward. So first, we're claiming that detections are sensors and they deliver high value alerts inside of Splunk. What does that mean? So we've broken it down into kind of three important aspects here. First and foremost, these alerts are identity first, identity centric, and we use our own Splunk generated source of truth to catalog those identities. There's a little bit of a technical mashup description here, and this slide and this first part is going to be a little dense, but I promise we'll make it a little more clear with some examples and when we get into the actual Splunk deployment. But what we're able to do with our identity searches and asset searches, as well as the asset and identity framework inside of Splunk, is we can immediately and dynamically create this high source of truth when it comes to users in the environment, known or unknown, systems in the environment, again, known or unknown, as well as external identities. External IPs is a good example. So we're able to do this and mash this up, but also in our detection and alerting, do some advanced normalization to make sure that we maintain this identity or this user is this user across the different technology stacks, as well as for systems and other identities inside of your environment. Stuart, any kind of quick comment
Yeah,
on this?
yeah. So in this transition of, so when a detection creates an alert output, you don't really worry about this. Like this is a second thought, which is, oh, it'd be nice to know who this user is or what role they're in. But if you try to change a detection into a sensor, then you have to ground that sensor to something, to an entity of some sort. So that's a user or a system. Without that grounding, you can't pull it back from triggering alert because you can't connect it and you can't contextualize it to put like, okay, what does this thing do? How important is it? So this is a specific sticking point for maybe detection engineers or architects who aren't necessarily understanding how to peel a detection into a sensor. But this is absolutely very important to have if you're going to take this approach.
Yeah, and that's a perfect lead in to the second piece that makes these high value alerts are this deep contextual awareness and enrichment. So we use the sensor network and the output of the sensors to fold and correlate as much information and activity together as we can. And we use a lot of different sources for that. Risk factors being one. So if there's a user that has high privilege or even an executive, we can escalate their context in detections and alerts to say, hey, this holds a little more weight than a normal average user. We also fold in threat intelligence feeds, which are traditionally kind of noisy and potentially messy. But if we look at just the matching activity inside of our detection and alerting and SIEM, then all of a sudden we can raise that awareness around actual known threat activity inside of the environment, as well as fold in complexities of large organizations. So we have data called out. This is really important if you are in kind of a company that has mergers and acquisitions or kind of independent business units, as well as operating teams and things that give you context about, all right, this person's role qualitatively is this. How do I fold that into my decision making when I'm looking at different alerts?
And and the thing to look at specifically with this deep contextual awareness is this is the this has always been the dream for alerting and detecting is how do I influence information from my business into these technologies, into a security platform. And everything you see listed in that box are things that are important to you as a business. And now we get to identify it within the platform to help the platform know what matters to you. So this is always like when we talk about crown jewels or we talk about sensitive business units, this has always been a sticking point of high customization. Now we don't have to because we've separated the sensor from the knowing or the context. Now we can allow both to be extremely dynamic and represent your approach to business.
Yeah, which is another perfect lead into this third piece. So everything that Stuart just kind of outlined and unpacked there, we folded into math equations, essentially. So we have mathematical triage of not only outputs of our detections, but also how those detections correlate together to give us actual alerts. And it's triaged using those business decisions and priorities that Stuart just outlined. All right, so let's go from academic to
Let's see
actual
something.
implementation. Yeah.
Tired of slides for a minute. Let's actually see something.
All right. So are we in the right? Can you
Yep.
see the okay.
Yep.
All right. So everything that we just unpacked there, and I agree, it was dense and it was kind of a lot, but we wanted to set the stage of how much information and power is coming forward in this one screen. So we are in the Cyderes app for Splunk, and this is our daily, hourly, alert-driven driver/investigation screen. And I'll let Stuart just kind of walk us through this as you read it as an analyst, giving us the examples of all of the deep context and identity-driven things that we just covered.
So when we talk about all these different thoughts, like, okay, well, things to investigate as an analyst, one is, well, what's the object? What's the entity? So for here, we picked a server that caused an alert. So, hey, let's go investigate what's going on with this server. And there's two things we always want to know. First, what is it? Like, what's going on with this machine in relation to our business? And then the other is, well, what behaviors or anomalies are our sensors finding? And then, because we might say, hey, we're going to be extra sensitive, it's a domain controller. or it's kind of a throwaway server in a dev environment, dev data, we don't care as much. So we need both sides in order to make an accurate decision as an analyst. So this first row is stage setting. What is this asset? And so you'll see our source for this is a lookup file, but this is where, when Will was mentioning vulnerability scanning, EDR tools, CMDB, you'll see multiple sources listed where we understand what is this machine. So for here, we see it's a Windows server that is doing collaboration. So, might be a SharePoint server. So we might end up seeing a vulnerability around that, or like a web IIS vulnerability or something. So that just sets what is it. And then on the right are a couple of these like posture things to know about. So we do have a risk factor applied. So that was that crown jewel admin account or critical vulnerability. So we do see a critical vulnerability kind of bubbled up as far as risk posture. So we are a little concerned. And then down below, we actually see the vulnerabilities. So it looks like there's 7-zip installed. Well, 7-zip on a server, but it's good to know, right? So if we see some attacks against compressed files or something, maybe they're doing something weird. So again, this is just kind of stage setting for our decision making. Then this next row is okay, what are our sensors telling us about this machine? So it's kind of a high level on these detections, but it's letting us know kind of volume and diversity of the sensors. That's what we're reading right here is, are they kind of benign or generics like hits, or are they more specific? So when we look at, so there's that data compression again. So okay, I'm definitely going to want to look, but then we see some other weird ones. So we see a couple kind of generic system manipulation, but then that C script and that data compression is like, uh-oh, that combination, that mixture feels a little like malware. So, okay, we need to keep kind of peeling back these layers. So this next row tells us kind of blast radius of the behaviors, but also has this been going on? And we can see that there have been triggered alerts before. So we definitely have not been remediating this if this turns out to be malicious, or tuned it if it's benign. So that's the other indication here is we haven't taken a step to kind of embrace our knowledge on this. But that blast radius lets us know if there's other other systems or users. So when Will said identity centric or identity kind of is at the center of this, this just bubbled up that there's a local administrator account tied to this machine, the server, because of these detections. So that lets us know, hey, we might have to rotate that password if this turns out to be malicious, because it might be a compromised user. So we can click into that and actually see there. So now there's some different detections as well as additional related systems. So maybe they were able to guess our local admin password and they started pivoting, or right. So quickly we can start building that web for remediation or blast radius so that we can make a decision. This is super beneficial if you've ever had like kind of like a malware outbreak where it starts kind of worming through your system. It's also extremely beneficial with lateral movement because we're heavy on endpoint detections, but maybe we're not as heavy on, well, where's this account being used? What email traffic? What web traffic, right? So it's a way to help make sure we're not too blind about how user accounts are used in our environment.
Yeah, and good example of this is, well, it's a few years old now, but we had a large implementation, global customer. They had kind of this eternal blue ping-ponging outbreak. Like they would remediate it, and then it'd be quiet for a little while, and then they'd have another outbreak, and they just couldn't dial it in. So we were implementing this approach, and essentially found the patient zeros. Uh, and where were they again, Stuart?
Well, two of one was under a desk in Riyadh, and the other one was in a closet in Milan, Italy. So they actually had to dispatch people to go find these systems. But it's that kind of like when we talk about your ability to handle complexity or the way the business operates, that's why this can be super beneficial, is because the more accurate our sensing is and our contextual information, the easier it is to deploy resources to fix these things and actually truly get a fix.
And yeah, maybe the root cause is a handful of clicks away. So, all right, I'm gonna go back to
Yeah, go back to our server.
so here's yeah, we're
Okay.
back to the main controller.
So let's keep scrolling down. And now we start seeing some of the like specifics of those detections. So far we've just been figuring out who the players are and what sensors triggered. Now we want to start going into, well, what are the sensors telling us? So on the left, a left is the pretty USA Today MITRE chart. Yep, we use MITRE. Cool, cross that box off. But on the right is an interesting thing that within ES, not only can we anchor to a user or system, we can also start kind of recording processes, commands, file hashes, file names, anything like that as these threat objects, as these like breadcrumbs or artifacts that are left behind whenever there's a detection. So these look kind of generic, right? C script, all kind of stuff we're used to seeing. But if we sort by ascending, now, so these are the rare threat objects for this machine. And quickly we can see a JavaScript executing out of temp. We can see them emptying the recycle bin. That's kind of strange. And then we can also see them opening up like that iCalcs you'll actually see is granting, it's actually opening permissions on the C drive. So now that definitely feels like malware that's running, opening things, and then trying to cover its tracks. So let's actually see some of these risk messages that come out because you this has definitely piqued my interest. And here we go. Now we start seeing some of this narration that these sensors do. And this is what's great by taking this sensor approach, we can create these snippets of narration that when you stitch them together starts telling you a story. So what do we see right here on this story? Well, we see 7-zip executing on this machine that we have a vulnerability on. So that alone, hey, we really need to tighten that up. But it's strange that it's zipping temp with a password, so that easily could be data exfiltration. We see it turning off security services. We see it task killing. We see it opening up the firewall for network discovery and for file print sharing. So yeah, this is definitely malware. Now, this is lab because this is the closest we can get to kind of simulating a customer's environment. But this data set actually is a ransomware case where a ransomware script was executed on this machine, and then all the behaviors were recorded in this large data set, and our detections just mine out the hits on it. But it's meant to kind of give you the feel of what analyzing a threat or analyzing these risk events can feel like for your environment. So very quickly, we figured out what servers involved, what matters on that server, what are the weak points or the pressure points on that server, who else is involved, systems or user accounts, prior alert history. That case history, especially if you're working in a larger SOC, allows you to say, hey, what other analyst has background on this? Or is someone currently working on this who I should partner with? So it's like a heads up on what's currently being done with this machine or these threats, all the way down to here's the narration that I can put into an incident so that I can actually articulate what happened, why it's a threat, and immediately enact remediation. So essentially, we take all that decision making logic that's in your head and try to put dashboard panels to it to process it quickly so that you can end up with, yep, this is malicious, time to move into remediating it, kind of capping that well so that it doesn't infect anything else.
All right. Thank you. Let's jump back into.
It's dense, yeah, I totally agree, but that density comes out of all these desires we've had in the past as security professionals.
Yeah, but it's all there too. I mean, it's all on that one screen or a click or two away on a drill down. So identity driven with a deep contextual awareness that just gets enriched through programmatic triage essentially of what comes out of the detections. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that eternal blue outbreak, but here's another example of what we can do with these high value alerts. And this example has a couple of different data sources we're laying together, a couple of different detections, but the output is a very anomalous password share between two non-US based contractors. So users that are contractors escalate risk if that's, elevate risk as a program, if that's your decision. But this bubble up alert is what triggered an investigation, which again was investigated and found that one contractor was going on PTO, shared his password with contractor two to cover for him, and then subsequently logged in to cover for contractor one. Not ideal. But the next step of this was, all right, let's zoom out and look at, is this a isolated incident or is it kind of a pattern set of behaviors? And that's exactly what was found. So instead of
And
just, go ahead.
for anyone listening who has dealt with outsourcing firms or offshore firm, like this will send shivers down your spine because it's like one of those things that'll keep you up at night. So what's interesting about this one is, so it a little sensor triggered something that said, hey, this is kind of strange. And we did the investigation. You see line two, that's that kind of blast radius that you just saw us walk through. And but number three is only possible if you take this sensor approach where you're recording output from all of these detections so that historically you can look back to say, has this behavior been occurring over time? And if so, who's involved? That's only possible. So the first two might be possible with this traditional approach to alerting. But number three, this management of your posture is only possible if this stuff's recording. And that's how you can make real impacts in your security program because you're not dealing with like a broken sprinkler head. You're actually going all the way back to redirecting what put you at risk.
Yeah. And again, it's almost like you knew what I was going to talk about today, Stuart, because you're giving me the
Oh,
perfect
sorry.
example.
Sorry.
No, so the first output, high value alerts, which we spent a lot of time unpacking, and which there's a lot there, but there's a lot of power and capability there once you kind of get used to them. And then the second output is what Stuart was mentioning, this risk posture, understanding not only what's bubbling up and coming across you as in-process activities or alerts, but what is your actual exposure systematically and how can you influence it to the positive side. And so for that example, we're going to pop back into our Splunk environment demo. And this is a dashboard. Are we back in the demo? We good?
Yep. Yep.
Yep. So, Stuart, why don't you unpack this dashboard and so what it's showing us and how we got here?
So we we created this dashboard because we started running into security programs. They kept having findings with red teams and pen tests. That's how they stated their problem. But the real problem was they could handle alerts, but they didn't know how to influence their security posture. They were missing that pivot of what do the alerts tell us we should make for control changes. And so we created this dashboard with them, and it's kind of become a go-to tool in our toolbox for helping people make this connection to posture versus alerting and how they help each other. So what this is because we mine all different identity sources, one of them being LDAP. So we can actually flag any accounts that have a service principal name set or SPN. That's what triggers this Kerberos vulnerability. If someone gets in your environment, they can potentially get these password hashes. Great, but we can't just turn them all off. There's a structural feature that we need these SPN set for: single sign-on, other authentication services. So we can't just get rid of it. So what we have to do is kind of walk the tightrope of, well, let's make sure they're not privileged accounts. Let's make sure we're rotating passwords. Let's make sure we reduce the number of them. All canned remediation steps we know, but none of them are at our fingertips. They all take significant effort to organize, and that assumes that you get the support of leadership. So we have to explain where this intersection of the threat versus the risk is. And so that's what we try to show here. So on the left, we see risk events over time against any account that has an SPN set or is curb roastable. So we do see activity with these accounts showing up in our detection sensors. Okay, great. On the right, we actually have alerts from some of our SPN accounts. So it looks like this MS SQL one keeps triggering, again, a very identity centric alert we have for lateral movement or credential access. Makes sense. We should probably fix that. Then as we scroll down, so that just kind of sets, okay, what behaviors are we seeing with these accounts? And then here's some more detail about those risk events you saw. What are the actual detections that are triggering? So we see scheduled task change, we see some system changes, and some interactive logins. So that's kind of interesting because that means someone's actually logging in interactively with a system. So it's not just like batch or service account logins. And then we see, okay, well, how big of a breadbasket are these accounts? And so that's where this dashboard comes in. And what's great about this is, hey, Will, can you sort by password last set so that the oldest, just click it once. Yeah, here we go. So we have a machine, or we have a user account. So this CA user, so we actually have a user account that was listed as disabled, but it still has this SPN set. So the hash is still potentially kind of bubbling around. And the password was it 28, 18 years old?
Yeah,
Am I
2007.
reading that right? So these types of ahas we run into with customers every time we walk through this dashboard, their environment. They find little things. So what would it take to actually remove this user account? Or at a bare minimum, if it's disabled, let's reset that password to something crazy, or delete the service principal name. Again, what are we talking about? Tightening up your surface, this exposure management, this risk posture to figure out how to tighten up our footprint. That's what this really helps with. So you can look in here and say, hey, what accounts can I clean up? What ones have do not expire passwords on them that maybe they're before we implemented password requirements, right? When you hit 10 years old, the password requirements back then are very different than now. So even though in your audits you're saying, yes, everyone follows this password requirement, Your old ones might not be. So let's tighten that up. So this this can be, this dashboard is used in all different manners, but at the end of the day, what it's meant to do is guide control hardening or this tightening of your exposure in your environment very methodically and measurable. So when, if they were to remove that user, okay, the number of accounts that are susceptible to curb roasting reduces. So now we actually have metrics we can show leadership about steps we've taken to tighten our environment. So now we can actually prove our work. And again, when we go back to this is the value of a SIEM, it's more than just here's an alert, go work it. It's more about help inform the direction so that we get the biggest bang for the buck, not only in the money we spend, but in how we deploy our team's time. Because that's really the thing that's hard is how do I get the most out of my team and what work they should be doing? Well, we can now use the SIEM to help that and measure it and demonstrate it. So
Yeah, uh, exactly. And that's just one example of this advanced, well, real-time improvement of security posture. Everything that we talked through was around the Kerberos thing, risk exposure, or general vulnerability to it, I guess. Here's another example. So kind of the same process, the same way to look at the detections and alerts as sensors as opposed to just tickets. And this is something we do with clients routinely, maybe every time, when we implement Splunk and this approach. So this example, external scanning, a lot of alerts, a lot of activity. Well, can we do something as a program to address that versus just maybe filtering these out from an alerting standpoint or what have you? And so step two is, all right, how can we make this better? And in this example, well, we can look at what are these external IPs that are doing the scanning and compare that to some of our threat intel lists. So the SANS block list is used in this example, but essentially you got data that punches you in the face that says, hey, let's just block the SANS block list on our firewalls. And then let's make sure that we're actually maintaining that and it's working. So, and as Stuart said, let's measure the impact. So in this case, we looked at a volume reduction of 70% of alerts. We're blocking that traffic. So we're already improving our posture as a control and as a system. And then we actually can turn up our sensitivity to that. So we make sure that if in the future the control gets relaxed or we've definitely seen new firewalls get deployed and somebody forgot to flash the configs and they went out as default, and all of a sudden you get a spike in traffic. So this is another example of what you get from this next level of visibility and security execution with this approach.
and I just want to connect that this is an, again, this is this inflection of how we can use this approach to help two different teams or three or four. So commonly we get inundated with IOC matches off threat intel, or we get inundated with intrusion detection searches that, oh, it's blocked, don't worry about it. But what happens is when we work together, we can use this sensing data to show only malicious IPs would be blocked, not valid business ones. So that's what the SIEM helps us show. That's what these sensors help us show. So we can actually deploy a block. But what happens is when we push controls out to the front, out past this firewall, all of a sudden it takes pressure off everyone. It takes pressure off your intrusion detection. It takes pressure off your EDRs. It takes pressure off your threat intel feeds. And so what happens is, and it takes that alert pressure off your SOC. And what happens is all of a sudden people can stand up straighter and look they have a higher sensitivity threshold because they don't have all this volume they're having to kick out immediately. And so it's one of these things where it doesn't feel intuitive, but when you go through it, it's like, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. I just never went that far before to see how implementing a control can actually improve alert volume. It's not always tuning. Sometimes just put in a better control.
And
And
this
this,
this is recent, right? Like 2 weeks.
yeah, this was 2 weeks ago. And you can see, so I know there's still some of the like the colored area chart below. You'll still see that's because at the same moment of them deploying this, we doubled their detections at the same time. But the most important thing is that top chart, that bottoming out, that was their alerts effectively just not being present anymore because every one of those IPs is being blocked at the firewall. So it's not triggering intrusion detection. It's not triggering EDR. It's not triggering threat intel. And the other thing I just want to tell people is whenever a new vulnerability like an Avanti or a SharePoint hits the market, hits the open environment, these are the scanners that will pummel you. So if you put this list in, you'll be able to absorb anything new that comes as well, right? You add time. It's very rare in security that we can add time to figuring out a security situation. This is one of those few areas that as we push controls out, we actually help ourselves.
Yeah. And then one more example of this, except in the reverse. So this is, again, we were implementing their Splunk, specifically like an insider threat program and set of detections. And all of a sudden, there was a spike in this allowing of USBs to be mounted in endpoints, which was supposed to be a CrowdStrike policy that prevented users from doing that. Now, because we had this spike of allowed mounting, the security team saw it immediately. Within 24 hours, they figured out, oh, someone changed the CrowdStrike policy and notified them to remediate it. So first and foremost, they saw the failure of the control and then fixed that. But more importantly, they were able to identify 31 specific users who were allowed to mount USB drives. So not only was the security posture fixed very quickly, but you've also been able to quantify and identify what actual exposure and risk did we have. And, time is of the essence here. If it would have gone a few more days, that would have maybe been hundreds of users. And the director in this case, he's like, if we didn't have this running in Splunk, I don't think we would have seen this for 6 months. And then you would have thousands of users that would have been able to do whatever they wanted with the USB device on their systems. So
And real quick, what I love about this example is this is a customer who adopted this mindset that detections are sensors. They never expected an alert to come out of this ever because they already dealt with the control hardening, right? They already dealt with this as an issue. Why do I need this? And we said it's just a sensor, right? Just deploy it, just let it monitor. If anything comes in, who knows? And they're like, okay. Well, immediately, because they took that approach, we had the history because it's recording, but we also had the triggered alert because something that was not previously seen is now being seen in mass. So it's just a really nice example of why this shift makes sense or how it's different.
yeah, so I think that covers kind of the deep dives we had today. I think I've got one more. Well, here. So again, focused on these high value alerts, focused on this capability of viewing real-time risk posture that's actionable and can immediately move toward improving security posture. Again, it's all within Splunk. It's all within our Cyderes Splunk apps. Everything you just saw, if you have data in Splunk, we can essentially implement this and light this all up in about a week. And even though there's a lot here, even though it's super dense, even though Splunk's complicated, and all of these challenges we have inside of the program and outside of security programs and size of environments and dynamics, everything like that, uh, Cyderes is your partner to support all of that. And we've made it as simple as we can outside of you executing security operations in your program and making decisions about, all right, what's important, what's not important, how are we going to secure this organization on a continuous basis. Um, okay, so yeah, just a quick wrap up. Love to have any questions, or we can go back to the demo and double click on anything. But overall, we wanted to first and foremost kind of shift your thinking, change the narrative a little bit, and these are kind of the three big ones that we covered. So let's talk about the value of the SIEM for security outcomes and not just focus on cost. It's advanced telemetry coming from these sensors and not just alerts. And finally, risk posture is a continuous improvement process that we unlock essentially instantly based on what do you care about from a risk and a security standpoint. Um, and I think we
And
covered it.
and I think that first of all, shortcut, we just gave you the two most influential controls that we introduce to customers whenever we work with them. So if you want to like accelerate your program, that sans block list on your firewall and dealing with Kerberos, that's a shortcut key if you instantly want to show improvement to your leadership tomorrow. Work on those two. But the other thing I hope people take from this is the struggles that we've had connecting what we as security leaders want to technology that's handed to us. We don't have to be in opposition. We can figure this out. And so I hope that this breathes some life into no, you can actually influence this. You can actually show improvement. It's not just improvement through acquisition of tooling, it's improvement because you're actually changing your posture and you're showing how you're getting stronger and better and how great for a security program to be able to show that value up to leaders instead of just kind of taking it on the chin every time there's an issue. No, take control of it, be proactive, get engaged, get involved. And here's how. Here's how you can actually use this to steer a program. So, sorry,
All right.
soapboxy, super soapboxy. Sorry. I just get excited because, like, I've struggled with this. So I love this.
Yeah, any questions? Uh, Drop them in the chat. Like I said, we can go back to the Splunk environment demo and
And
deep
if
dive.
you're interested or want to have this discussion, sometimes we bump up against stuff that you only want to talk about internally or on a smaller call. Absolutely reach out. We love kind of those kicking the tires on, okay, where are you at? What would help? Where do you want to go? So absolutely just reach out. Like just to have a conversation and see what the next steps are.
Yeah, and I'll call out. So point number three is our answer to maturity. We don't like the term maturity because it's mature as opposed to whose rubric or scale. So at the end of the day, uh, if Splunk can search it, we can deliver value out of it on all the areas that we covered. So yeah, please reach out. Again, like if you've got the data in Splunk, this is days away. If you want to work with us, so it's very possible.